Noel Tock has been in Ukraine since 2023, part-time running Frontline evacuations. He's founded and participated in several charities to support Ukraine and to pioneer work on the ground that is both transparent in its funding sources and effective in action. He is Director of Strategy at KLYN Drones and Dog Help Kharkiv and co-founder at Volara Foundation. I've also been lucky to both meet Noel on the ground in Ukraine and, of course, have him as a guest on the Silicon Curtain channel before. And indeed, Noel was one of the most welcome guests at the first Silicon Curtain event that we ran in, oh, when was that? Was that 2023, wasn't it? Summer
It was
23.
summer of
Yeah.
23. Yeah.
And it was fantastic to meet there in Lviv, and there's been a lot more since then, but it was great to see you right at the start. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad to be back. I think last time we recorded in a playground or somewhere
Yes.
out back in Lviv, outdoors, and that was probably one of your few outdoor interviews in person.
I don't do too many of those,
So
and I wasn't
I feel privileged.
particularly well set up for it. I've got some mobile microphones that work a lot better now, and
Well,
cameras and
yeah.
tripods and stuff. But still, it has a very amateurish feel about it, and
Well, it's great
we
to be back.
recorded, yeah, we recorded with Georgi Ivanov's in a pub in Lviv recently.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And
That's right.
we'd had a couple of beers already, so I think some of the audience really appreciated the absolutely random amateur placing of the cameras, because we were already half cut.
That's how it's
Occasionally
done.
you have to
Yeah.
do those occasionally.
Yeah, 100%.
But you're on the ground, making stuff happen. We also ran an event for KLYN Drones in London, which was a sellout event, which is fantastic. Raised a little bit of money to help there. How is the funding situation now, though? Because we know that it was pretty buoyant in 22, 23, when Ukraine was dominating the news headlines. And then, of course, it dropped off. We had Gaza, and then we had so-called fatigue, information fatigue, war fatigue, whatever you want to call it. But
Overall
certainly
fatigue, yeah.
the coverage of Ukraine's dropped off. Is that reflected in donations and support for charities as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that has had multiple facets to it. If for people who haven't met me before, I started off doing animal evacuations back in 23, and still do that to this day, all around the front in Ukraine. And in 22, 23, there were still donation in kinds, and in terms of dog food, dog medicine, all that kind of stuff that you'd want to get from corporate sponsors and donors, and all of these sort of donations are out the window. So it's really down to cash only. And on that front, yeah, people have a lot of fatigue. There's been other conflicts that have popped up that have also taken up a lot of the attention, and that has obviously caused some stress. So it means that you have to change the way you fundraise, and you rely often on less people, but more consistent people. And that's the backbone of the funding for smaller organizations in Ukraine. Absolutely.
And of course, some go down the corporate route. Say we take Superhumans has gone down that route, whereas
Yeah.
Unbroken. So we're talking about really big sort of
amazing
charity
charities.
operations, local operations here. Some will go down the corporate route. Some will go down their sort of connections within the administration and the so-called sort of elite in the country. But going for private donors, it's a different approach, isn't it? You have to really connect, and you also have to create the impression of extreme transparency. Go overboard to make sure people have absolute trust. I mean, why is that necessary? Why has that become necessary? And how do you go about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Ukraine already started off from a negative position when it came to finances and funding and the allegations of corruption and everything that goes down that rabbit hole. Recent studies have found that there has been absolutely no evidence of any sort of corruption at the charity and NGO level within Ukraine, and that is, I mean, as good as that is to hear. When you look at the overall data in terms of funding, from like the $10 billion that have come in to Ukraine for humanitarian aid since the beginning of full scale, only 1%, and I really repeat, like less than 1%, has gone to local and national non-governmental organizations.
Oh, I thought it paused there. Well, I'll cut that
Yeah,
out.
no worries.
That's a tiny figure, isn't it? And one thing that disturbed me is the amount of adverts I see for large international NGOs, UN, Disasters Emergency Committee, etc. And they use images of elderly people, frail people, often women and children in Donbass and in areas which clearly sort of ravaged areas of Ukraine. And yet you go on the ground and there's very little direct or anecdotal evidence that they're really present in any numbers or where that money might actually be invested.
It's incredibly disappointing, disheartening. I think you can get angry about it, but for people like me and the groups I represent, a lot of it is just how do we make the next week work? How do we make the next month work? We don't even have time to get upset about international organizations misrepresenting themselves, really just not funneling the money past the Dnipro River, towards the east. It's just not happening, right? Like this is you're not actually, people who are sending money into these large organizations aren't actually funding real help. They're funding the illusion of aid, which is then rewarded through this photography that you talk about, which is all created by local partners. That is not something that the UN has done themselves or any other organization of that size. They do not go there. 95% of casualties or victims from NGOs and aid organizations are local nationals.
And then there's a difference as well, isn't there, between the smaller charities operating in Ukraine and those that are based on, let's say, local knowledge, local talent, local resources. So if, the 1% of funds is going towards Ukraine, what percent then goes towards actually sort of locally sourced, locally based charities?
Sorry, so the 100% pot that goes into Ukraine or to the Ukraine mission, let's say, only 1% goes to the local partners, which are Ukrainian registered. And I think that amounted to something like $58 million or whatever in the first 2 years. So this ridiculously small amount. And it's almost as if this aid system has sort of perfected this kind of moral arbitrage, right? Where the big international organization takes the money and the Ukrainian volunteers take the artillery shells, they take the Shaheds, they take the drones. So it's a system where financial rewards are completely decoupled from physical risk, and it creates this market where you're essentially outsourcing danger. And that's not a system that's just broken. It's dangerously unaccountable by design.
And if there's, we'll get into some of the detail in a minute, but there's also a huge disparity, isn't there, between the wages that would be required to pay international people, either externally from the country or if they're present on the ground, and pay locals. Again, we're not necessarily talking about people with a huge disparity of skills here, but a huge disparity of cost. Therefore, if an NGO is running a large foreign team, they are almost by default going to have a fraction of the impact than if they're able to build a local team using local wages.
Yeah, it's. I'll give you an example of, but let's say, I mean, I want to say it's an extreme example, but it's not even that crazy. Take a white collar worker from New York, let's say, working at the UN or a large organization there who makes, I don't know, $140,000 a year. They come to Kyiv on a trip to do local program work, whatever it may be, just something. From a security point of view, they have to stay in the Intercontinental or the Hyatt. So that's another, 140, 150 a night. God knows what it is. On top of that, there's danger hazard pay. There's a couple other things. So you're easily running up a tab of $20,000 in that month without the travel itself. Now, with those $20,000, I can fund two of the charities, maybe two and a half, in my portfolio of frontline charities for the entire month with all employees and everything, including the gas, including the transport, everything. It's. I mean, I'm laughing because it's so ridiculous.
And they're not
It's
restricted
yeah,
to really what they do. Of course, you're going to have your own internal protocols, sort of disciplines, safety procedures, etc.
yeah.
But you Ukrainians, and indeed yourself, you're going to be going into dangerous areas as a matter of course, although trying to minimize that risk. Whereas many of these international employees, who, as you say, cost an arm and a leg, likely will not be heading too far out of Kiev or even Lviv, and certainly not into frontline areas, because
They're
these
usually not allowed on
organizations,
the left bank.
yes, their
So
insurance
the
policies
yeah, so they're
disallow
usually
it.
not allowed to cross the river. So half of Kiev is already off the map. That's how ridiculous it is. I yeah, and like one of the sort of more ridiculous terms in this kind of international aid space is this concept of last mile, last mile humanitarian relief or whatever it's called, and they call it the most difficult stage of delivering relief supplies. But for the teams I represent, that last mile is often the first mile. It's the only mile. It's where they live. It's where everything happens. It's there, and to then see that there's this a whole other layer of busy work in terms of trying to create apps and logistical optimization software for last mile distribution is just so ridiculous when the people with the most knowledge are the people closest to the problem. That's always been the case in every industry you've ever looked at. This is from a capitalistic point of view, and in profit businesses, this has always worked like that.
And in this instance, of course, we have Ukrainians who are articulate. Many in these organizations will speak English and have a good knowledge of how these sort of NGOs function or dysfunction, as it were, and they can speak out. I mean, is this one of the challenges that in the decades where this international aid industry really got going from the sort of, the 50s onwards, it's often operated in places where the locals didn't feel they could call it out or didn't have the means to or necessarily the connections or confidence to do that.
I'd say there's two facets to this. So one is before full scale started, you already had a lot of aid organizations which at the time were able to build themselves in a more mature way and become some of the more internationalized NGOs of Ukraine. So you've mentioned some good ones with Unbroken and Superhuman, which have great connections to the West. They have fundraising teams in the West. They're able to operate at that level. So they've hit escape velocity and been able to escape the perils of frontline work. But the charities I represent, they don't really speak English. I still use translator apps with some of them. They are financially poor. They are time poor. They are poor on sleep. So they're health poor. They don't have any extra points to go run side quests on filling out grant applications, especially in this environment where the bureaucracy of the large organizations make it so overwhelmingly complex that there's no room to even begin for these teams. Their only mission is literally to try and survive.
And of course, there's also the fear, isn't there? Or there has been the fear in countries where civic society is underdeveloped, that if you speak out, then these international NGOs are the only help that's coming, and you critique them, and that's it. There's nothing left, and you cannot rely on government.
Mm.
In Ukraine, we've got a situation here with incredibly strong civic society, and many of the niches which these international institutions may, in some instances, going into certain countries, maybe developing them from the ground up or helping sort of kickstart those local initiatives. And I'm not critiquing it here. I'm saying, okay, well, they're doing a job. It may be expensive, but
Yeah.
they're filling a vacuum, as it were, and getting the ball rolling and setting an example, training local people up. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. But here in Ukraine, you actually have that civic sector. So there is the option. Now, when it comes to donations, of course, we know of many organizations which are doing a very effective work that have, I would say, extraordinary transparency and great professionalism. But we know those through connections, through being on the ground, through,
Yes.
let's say, this sort of community due diligence that takes place. And people have actually gone to their warehouses, their offices, and or traveled with them to the east and seen it directly. This is quite difficult, isn't it, for the public who want to support Ukraine to understand where they should be putting their money or their time, their effort, their energy.
It's the great paradox of it all, right? That the people in the biggest bit of whatever front line in East Ukraine are just furthest away from the West. Physical distance, language, business learnings, and how to communicate. None of these people have a LinkedIn profile. Nobody's doing professional networking. It's almost impossible to get to know these people, and I think this is also why I've identified that for myself as the highest leverage play I can undertake in terms of trying to connect those dots and to be one of those connectors. And I realize it's, maybe a drop in the ocean, but when we responded to Volchansk last year on May 10th, May 11th, 2024, as soon as it kicked off, the whole Russian offensive up there, and we were at the rally point. It was us. It was Volchansk police. There was special operations. There was one mechanized battalion, and then there was a bunch of frontline volunteers from different 4-person charities in half-broken vans. And when you're there, you realize that you can have an incredibly large impact by even doing small things. The irony of it all was that there were more news teams than there were large international aid organizations there. There were no international international organizations there on the ground those first few days. But there was all the large news teams saying, "Hey, this is the focal point of the war now. This is the offensive. This is where everything's happening." And you're there with your half-broken van, driving through the smoke with no idea what's going to be on the other side, to run evacuations for this city. It doesn't add up, and these moments help you realize that there's really this need for this, but at the same time you can have an impact even if it's on a small scale. And I know through the organizations that I now support, which 2 of which are in evacuations, 1 of which is in emergency response teams, another one is K9 search and rescue, and then 2 others are animal welfare. The dollars go such a long way. It goes such a distance that it's genuinely incredible when $100 hits the account.
And of course, because you're there, you have those interactions with people on the ground at the front who are traveling backwards and forwards with a degree of frequency. They'll have certain places they know. They'll have maybe temporary bases or permanent bases. They'll be communicating with people. They'll understand the need at a particular point in time, because we know the needs of various charities change depending on, time of the year, where you are on the front. Maybe things have changed, and it's very difficult, I think, for international organizations, especially if they don't have Ukrainian or Russian speakers, to have that sort of level of reactivity to what's required.
Yeah, I agree with you, but at the same time, there's a handful of international volunteers out there who don't speak. I mean, I don't speak either language. I haven't had time. I'm also time poor as a result of all this. And not to mention Kharkiv is all Russian speaking anyway. So it's doable. There's no problem for. I don't have a degree in humanitarian whatever. I haven't worked at the UN. I haven't worked at these places. I just went, and my first evacuation after day two was 5 kilometers from the border, and then a couple days after that, I was beyond Chasivyar, and like you just have to throw yourself in there, but that's how you learn what's going on. You can be an international supporter. You're not gonna, figure out all the exact little things here and there, but if you communicate with people, you'll figure it out, and you'll eventually get there and be productive. So I have no compassion whatsoever for these large organizations not doing their job and not saving lives, because ultimately the money they're using is money we could be using.
And let's turn to the specifics of that, because of course the first activities you got involved with were evacuation of animals, and that was a critical need. There are other charities focusing on getting people outside of frontline areas. That's still going on, and you've done some of that as well. But the need changes, doesn't it, depending on the shifting front lines and which towns are coming sort of closer to those front lines. But animals are a particular need, and often will be abandoned or left behind out of necessity by people kind of fleeing frontline areas. So let's dive into that. And then, of course, you made the move to drones. And I think we've talked about this before, but I think it's interesting
Yeah.
for the audience of why that became, such a burning need.
Yeah. So the when I first came to Ukraine, I thought to myself, well, why am I like there's so many humans in need here. Why am I doing the animal thing? And then I realized that our team is just so like specialized on especially like large and complex dogs, that no other charity at the front, like we share those duties with other large charities. So ARC in Animal Rescue Kharkiv, inside of Kharkiv, will deal with a lot of regular dogs and cats and parrots and fishes and everything that they evacuate, but we deal with larger animals, and we're just really really good at that. And what you've realized when you're there is that a lot of organizations have gotten really really good at stuff. So evacuations is not just a matter of, hey, let's just get a bunch of people out. You may need medical training, and maybe year one of the war, that could have been everybody with first aid training. Now, year two, three, four, whatever, people will have paramedic training. They'll have they'll have training in psychology to help the elderly. They might have training in heart attacks and stroke and whatever else may happen. So there is this increasing skill tree, if you want, and progressions of knowledge and experience and capabilities that everybody has become an expert. So I'm glad we did that and continue to do that. So there's, as you say, as soon as the front lines shift, there's a need for evacuations, because there's a rift or like a ripple effect through local populations, and then things need to happen and people need to move. But yeah, last year there were two events really. One was the missile attack on the children's hospital in Kiev, and the second was in Kharkiv, where this girl was waiting for her friend in a park, and a piece of shrapnel essentially decapitated her, from during middle of the day. I think it was a cab that came in, and that just evoked, I guess, a response in me to also participate in defense, defense, because a lot of my work is the evacuation and and trying to clean up the result of incoming attacks, and why not be on the side defending it a bit more. And that's when I got involved on the drone side. And I was very fortunate to meet Xenia, who founded the charity, and then be a part of that. So we are a charity that supports effective units from Ukrainian Special Operation Forces, to Gore, to other brigades in the supply of regular FPV drones. And from that is where I then decided to create a foundation. But you had a question, so I've been speaking
No,
for a
it's
while.
interesting because the history of KLYN is an interesting one. I mean, some of the people involved started with fixing, I think, dwellings, accommodation in Kharkiv, and had some extraordinary success with that. But when some of the renovations that they'd begun to do, or finished even, started getting struck again for the second time, that's when I think there was this mental pivot that we need to win first before we can necessarily reconstruct in certain areas. I mean, that was quite a hard realization.
Yeah, the sort of story arc that Xenia went through, from being a floral champion of Ukraine to having her flower shop, and then overnight turning that flower shop into a volunteer hub or coordination center, to then going to Kharkiv and living there and helping the northern towns with roofing, clothes, everything, to then going to drones, has been an extraordinary journey. And this is where I think where my work goes, is to support these Ukrainians that are just closest to the problem. They are the ones who know, and there's no reason for it's not about trying to build my own sort of brand or anything like that. It's about funding their empires and pushing that through, so that the way they work can be done at larger scale.
And it's part of an extraordinary ecosystem, isn't it? You've got ones that are evacuating people. You've got charities that are helping to build stuff, rebuild stuff. You've got many military-related ones now. But you also
no
have a lot
coordination whatsoever. It just works. It's fluid.
Yeah. And then there's a law related ones. I mean, one I'm particularly impressed with is not only the ones that won the Nobel Prize, but also truth hounds, those that are actually documenting Russian war crimes to a standard that could support future prosecutions. But I'm also interested in how many of these charities actually will work together, will tip each other off, will pass information, and in some instances, maybe even bounce off each other's logistics.
Yes and no. It's if you're really working the front lines, it's a total mess, and you're running your own kind of show to a certain extent. So you may partner with other small charities, might go on trips together, but that is kind of the extent of it. There's a couple like Telegram groups for coordination at larger scale. So when things like Volchansk happen, or in parallel there was Lipsy, there's channels, and there's a sort of volunteer center, if you will, to kind of help coordinate. And that is largely go there, don't go there. We're going over here, doing this. It's not how are we going to coordinate the shipment of all these pallets from this point at the Polish border to Kharkiv. There's no like Excel level optimization here. This is still very much, hey, what are you up to today? What are you doing next week? Hey, can you do this? Can you do that? So you're trading favors, I guess, in large part, and a lot of that has to do with transport and just helping each other out. But it's very, I make it sound, I'm not trying to take away the seriousness of it. I'm just saying it's extremely fluid because it's built on trust.
Yeah.
So if you say you're going to do something and you do it and you show up on time, that trust is maintained, and it's a full trust. And if you then go and do frontline evacuations together or any other work like that, there's full trust anyway. So the system works because it's fluid and built on trust. And that's something that large organizations could never replicate in their wildest dreams.
And what's your activity this year? Because, of course, each year has been had a different character. 2022, it's the shock of the invasion, the success of the initial pushback. 23, big hopes to try and drive Russia out, but for various reasons, that wasn't able to happen, and Ukraine wasn't supplied at the scale required to achieve that. 24, you're getting into war fatigue. 25, here we are, and now things are escalating again into, I would say, an energy war that's having an impact, which it wasn't able to have actually the last 2 years. The last 2 years, the energy infrastructure was pretty resilient, unless you look at the absolute frontline areas. Now we're getting into a real, I would say, sort of tough slog. I'm not sure it's the end game, so to speak, but certainly there's a sort of desperation on the Russian side to, quotes, achieve something. And how does that impact your experience there and, of course, your operations?
It has zero impact. Everybody I work with and everything I do is about the sort of the next mission and the current needs. Everybody I talk to on the ground, none of us ever talk about the larger politics. There's literally zero about that. If there's any kind of more macro sort of talk, it's about potentially how weapons are changing, how drones may be entering Kharkiv, so now we need different equipment. It goes to that level, but otherwise it's how's family, how are your dogs doing, do you need anything? Like that's what my experience has been, and I think that's also what gives a place like Kharkiv so much resiliency and makes it unbreakable in the end, is this relentless pursuit of just chasing, or said differently, like this courage is almost like this kind of direct counter strategy to the enemy's cruelty. This is the lifeblood that keeps it going. So those larger narratives and story arcs and whatever's in the media doesn't really register.
It's literally, there's no option except to fight. And if you're going to fight, you might as well do it properly. Yeah. And is there a difference in character then, the places you travel? Because we met in Lviv, and even though this year, I have had a lot of trips, we didn't manage to bump into each other on some of them when I was going further east.
Welcome to Kharkiv.
Yes. Well, yeah, in April. I did for the first time in April.
Okay, great.
I
was there.
Quite fleeting. We just passed through.
Okay.
It was with an aid convoy, so we're literally sort of drop shipping stuff and constantly on the move.
Last mile logistics.
Yes, that was it. No, real last mile. And then, going and dropping stuff at, quite strategic military bases is quite an experience as well. But there is a different character. Just visually, there's so many differences there, but that sense of, I would say, stoical resistance kind of does get stronger. That determination gets stronger the further east you go.
I mean, Kharkiv is one of the cleanest cities I've ever been to in my life. So if anything gets hit, if a flower pot gets knocked over, whatever it may be, you can be sure it's being reconstructed. And, there's this eternal pride around gardening and their flowers and everything, in Ukraine as a whole, but definitely in Kharkiv. So, yeah, it's your actions go a very long way in the East, as opposed to words. So I think it's about what are you going to do today.
And what are your plans really, or is it very difficult to make plans? What are your plans really for the rest of the year, next year? One has to assume that this is going to, there's no end in sight. Without diving into the politics of it, there's really no end in sight, and you therefore have to plan to scale operations and keep them rolling.
Even if there was peace tomorrow and some kind of great change or whatever, there would still be so much to fix and things to do that all the fundraising I'm doing now and everything still applies. Nothing really changes. So I think you're even at that point you would try to help people come from a negative position back to even just a neutral one. But in terms of the plans, I am solely focused on Volara these days. Obviously, if I can still go on animal evacuations, I will. But I'm solely focused on my own foundation, Volara, which supports 6 micro or frontline micro charities, 4 of which are Kharkiv based. two of which go into the rubble every day. So there's always the fear of double taps and God knows what else. And I just want to be able to support them as best as I can because they are the experts. So I'm trying to transition some of my role from, I feel like I've paid my dues and gotten like a relatively good feeling of every single gas station in the East. But
how many of
I
those
realized
frankfurters in bread have you had? Probably, yeah. You know,
we've had a lot. I even got to the point where I started asking for the hot dogs without bread because I didn't want the extra calories. It's that many, unfortunately. But yeah, it's I feel like I'm sort of hitting a rate limit in terms of the actual help I'm doing, or seen differently, I feel like I can have a much larger impact by taking a number of these charities like into this portfolio that I'm fundraising into from the West. So the real magic here is trying to communicate that these charities exist, that I vouch for them, that these are their stories, this is the work they're doing, and communicate that all to the West, because the fundraising they need is really not that much. If you send me any money, it's going an extremely long way, and the idea behind the transparency of it all is that you can almost feel that, oh, you've made a donation and that's basically resulted in a tourniquet or something else happening a couple of days later. So it's really this near real-time transparency and cause and effect that I'd love to be able to communicate to people and build a community around that, especially for these
I'm gonna ask a
frontline
question
charities.
I already know the
Yes,
answer
please.
to. I mean, this has a direct impact on donations. One, the idea of transparency. Secondly, that sort of demonstrable evidence, even if it's just sort of digital. And then that idea that it's real time. If you can get a conjunction of these three things, plus I would say the fourth, in working with Kharkiv, Ukraine, and Jiggers Poor, there's a fourth here, and this is a really difficult one, which is people have endless frustration when they've decided to give, and then you hit the button and the transaction doesn't go through. It bounces because it's Ukrainian bank or whatever. But there's these four conjunctions of ease of use, transparency, evidence, and almost real-time impact. If you can get those, surely that has a huge impact on
I feel so
actually
much pain when
giving.
you say that. Yeah, so Ziga's Paw is a great example of financial transparency of a new charity being able to fundraise a good amount and doing it successfully. The payment methods, however, I think they accept. I'm not sure what they accept. Maybe Google Pay or Monobank and like Pay or
Monobank, I
something.
think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So we at Dog Help Kharkiv, there was the bank called us and said, "Hey, you received $10,000 from Switzerland," and for us that's like a month of like salaries, everything. Like it changes everything. And they said, yes, we need passport copies of the people who sent the money to validate the transaction. And then we said, well, who sent the money? And they said, we can't tell you. We need the passport copies. So we never got the money, which is
That's ridiculous.
absolutely infuriating. Yeah, and all the banks operate a bit differently and have some kind of stuff going to it, which is why I also decided to register in France. Just got the registration code. We will turn on Stripe and credit card donations in the coming days. I am very excited to be able to process flawless transactions without any sort of issues, because 50% of more than 50% of people that I send links to for Monobank and whatever get their transactions rejected.
Yes. Yeah.
And it hurts. It really hurts a lot.
And this is just the lack of communication, I guess, between international transaction systems, local transaction systems. It's not a problem you can fix. You can only find sort of alternative methods. I mean, one of the ones that I'm testing here, of course, is I, as someone who is almost, let's say, not a broker, but an introducer, as it were, I'm trying to make sure that I don't handle any of the transactions at all.
Yeah.
they're all handled by the local charity, even when we're doing sort of fundraisers and so on. That's part of my sort of transparency, that I'm not getting the money. Therefore, that's one area of doubt completely closed off immediately. But I just started partnering with a clothing store run by Ukrainians in the US, and fortunately they use international payment systems. And then
Amazing.
they're going to be donating sort of 25% of profits to
That's
a
amazing.
nominated charity in Ukraine. So that seems to have got a good way to get
Yeah.
around that.
I have not been able to get around that. When some of the charities I support run into issues or don't have money, I've just sent my own money through PayPal and
Mm.
just call it a day.
Uh,
Because
but
it's
then
just
there's tax nightmares that come from that kind
no.
of
I mean,
thing.
I like
Receipt of
I
money and
yeah, no, but this is where, yeah, like I rather just make the transaction happen, and like it's not going to be tax. I don't need it to be tax deductible or
yep,
anything. It's just it's just so infuriating that the capital is there, the charities are there, but the bridge isn't there.
yeah.
And that's the thing I'm trying to fix through transparency, payment systems, marketing, communication, all that kind of stuff, so that someone who then donates feels not only like they've helped, but they feel like they're part of it.
Well, let's turn in this in the last bit here. Let's turn to the personal toll, because this is, I'm very mindful that everyone who's involved in any kind of civic society or charitable thing, or whether it's sort of mental health for service men and women in Ukraine. I mean, there is a toll on the volunteers themselves at every level. One, you're trying to survive under bombardment and Russian aggression. Two, you're bombarded by informational nonsense. Especially if you speak English and look at social media,
I
those
don't
can
speak
be very
English. I don't
mentally
speak Ukrainian or
stressful.
Russian.
Yeah, well, and in there as well, yeah, there's plenty of that stuff in those languages too.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
and then you're trying to make sure that you can make ends meet personally, plus doing all this stuff for your country. I mean, this must take a huge toll on people's mental health, and in fact, they may be storing up issues for the future, because when you're in this situation, you tend to be able to, I guess, exert yourself beyond what you thought was capable. But at some point, when it ends, I imagine people are building up a lot of emotional stress they're going to have to deal with.
It's it's so hard to put in words how much people go through. And I'll try to give some examples. So, the Kharkiv evacuation charity that I support is run by this nice lady Tina. I met Tina on an evacuation in Kupiansk last year or end of 23. I'm not quite sure when, but I remember being in a car and being told that she lost her husband 4 weeks ago here in Kupiansk when he was crossing a bridge when he got hit by a missile, because they were running evacuations that day
Mm-hmm.
in the town of Kupiansk. And to hear how, she had to process that, and then she went back out, I think it was a week later, to keep
Mm.
running evacuations, is it's it's very hard to put in words. It's certainly someone who's a leader and feels a very high sense of responsibility, but also has an incredible will to change things. And that has been, that is one story. I also have Alexandra, which runs the K9 search and rescue in Kharkiv. So she has dogs to find living people and dead people. She came from Luhansk. She could have easily gone to Zurich, Valencia, London, wherever to live, but she decided to stay in Kharkiv and use her knowledge of training dogs to train search and rescue dogs, and then to go into the rubble on a nightly basis where you have double taps. So just last week there was a double tap in a Kharkiv firefighter, state emergency services employee got hit and passed away. I have Sergey, which runs resources, ERT, which himself, and this is a team that goes into the rubble to provide medical help, because the firefighters don't have the experience and the paramedics are not allowed to go into the rubble. So they're not allowed to go into the collapsed buildings and everything. And before the war, he was grading furniture, then started doing evacuations, then became a combat medic, then got wounded, and then started this charity. And everybody's bank account is more than on zero. And they've all paid an incredible price to get where they are, and to still keep doing what they're doing every day is it's really mind-blowing. So for me, to focus on people like this, you're not betting on some Excel optimization model. You're betting on the Tinas, the Alexandras, the Sergeys of this world, or said differently, the most undervalued asset in this entire crisis. The international system overlooks them, but we believe that people like this are the key to winning the humanitarian war.
That's it. And people see that bravery locally as well. They see that resilience. It must provide an example to others.
It inspires
around.
me to do what I do, to support them. I do it because of them.
That's it.
At the end, when you work in places like Kharkiv and everything, it's I said before, I don't watch the news, but you get increasingly disconnected from these events that are far away from you, and you get increasingly connected to the people that are close to you and next to you that you work with, and that then comes down to a point where your interactions on a daily basis are very real, and they're about the outcomes you can generate that day. And I think that is a wildly different thought process than anybody who's trying to come up with some kind of 6-month roadmap for the reconstruction of some town in some western part of Ukraine, right? Like we're talking about different worlds here.
And this is a subject for another conversation, but I think you tapped into something super important here, which is so much of not just the mechanics of Russian disinformation is designed to divide people. It's also designed to convince you that there are no solutions to problems. And of course, if you live detached from people, detached from society and reality, and you don't see those examples of heroism, if you don't live and breathe them every day, then you can get trapped in this sort of digital nihilism, which then breeds kind of despair on the one hand and extremism on the other. Whereas you're talking about being detached from that and immersing yourself back in human, not just human life, but action. Lived evidence that action can save lives, improve people's lives, and actually, no matter the mental toll, these people who are in action are gaining something from that as well, a certain grounding, which gives them resilience against the sort of lies and nihilism of Russian propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, you have an open invite to come to Kharkiv and to meet all these charities directly yourself and see what they're all about and who the people behind them are. I'd love that for you.
Yeah, we'd love to. I was talking to Jigaspoor about coming out on one of their trips to deliver drones.
Great.
And that would be a great opportunity to do a number of these things.
More than welcome.
Fantastic. Well, Noel, this is it. We're going to wrap it up for today. We're going to put links, obviously, in the description of the video. If people are really keen to help, then we do encourage them to get in touch. If they're serious about helping, whether it's time, money, resources, or skills, then
always welcome.
Yeah, I know you always welcome those inquiries. Even if they don't come to anything, people shouldn't be afraid to get in touch. And
absolutely not. And I will
questions.
always answer everyone. And if there's no opportunity, that's fine. I'll be very honest about it. But if there's anything I think that's possible, I will absolutely be thrilled about it.
Fantastic. It was tremendous speaking today. Thank you for everything you do, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the ground.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!